Hello and welcome. Before we start talking about climate change in general, I think that it's helpful to consider where we actually are and the diverse and beautiful ecosystems and climate that we have in this region, which is really quite unique. Now, we have challenges that are coming up. Our ecosystem in this area will change. But by acknowledging the beauty and value and um, diversity of this ecosystem, it helps remind us of what our actions can actually help protect, right? That's also important to acknowledge and value the things that we care about and our surroundings that are just so amazing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about um, our area. So when we think about Washington State, you often think about pine trees, right? The glorious green forests, dense forests that exist in this area, particularly along the coast. When you look at this region from space, you will actually see that it is amazingly green, so heavily forested. It's really quite astonishing. Of course, once you see the populated areas that that's not true of all areas, but once you get out of urban areas, it becomes very green and lush in this region, and that's due to the climate. So prior to urbanization, we have stories of the Puget Sound area. It used to be covered in these amazing old-growth forests with massive tall trees that must have been gorgeous, and these extensive, vibrant wetlands, and these really rich wildlife communities along the coasts and into the forests. And the development over the last couple hundred years has really shifted those ecosystems. And I think the importance of doing a land acknowledgement to the Puget Sound Salish peoples who lived here is really to acknowledge what was lost in that, both for the local ecosystems, but also for the peoples who lived here and do live here currently. The Coast Salish lived up and down this coast, lived in the land, hunted and foraged, and had vibrant communities here that were impacted when white colonists started moving in. I'll note that we know a little bit about this area, and UW-Bothell itself, when we're talking about the land that we're on, was the people who lived there with the Tlawadis, a Sammamish tribe. So essentially right where UW-Bothell stands today. So this shift, a large component to this was the Point Elliott Treaty, which you should know about as you're thinking about our particular region. This was Governor Stevens essentially wrote this treaty in English. There was some translation as he talked to local Puget Sound tribes around it, but what's clear is that communication was not effective, and the tribes were not fully aware of what they were signing when they did this. And that, in essence, the Point Elliott Treaty doesn't look very different from theft of the land, although they paid the grand sum of $150,000 for the swath of land that extends all the way down from Rainier, almost down to Mount Rainier, all the way up to Canada, right? So when local tribes tell you that their land has been stolen, we really should pay attention to that. And I think that it's also really important for us to take seriously efforts currently to acknowledge that and begin to right some of those wrongs and harms, as the Coast Salish were pushed from their lands, often violently, and suffered a tremendous amount of harm over the last couple centuries. So, for example, attempts to do real rent, and also to acknowledge and bring back leadership, increased leadership of local tribes and thinking about our local ecosystems and protecting them. Now, I think it's important to note that local tribes have been leaders when it comes to climate change. Many examples of this. Um, One recent example is Lummi challenging the Cherry Point coal export terminal and blocking that, actually using the Point Elliott Treaty. Other examples would be, a lot of the work that local tribes have done to actually think about climate change. Some local communities have actually started developing plans for adaptation to shifts in sea levels and climate change affecting their local wildlife populations. So they're doing a lot, and they really have done a tremendous amount to lead us as we think about how we can begin to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. So I think that it's important for us to keep that in mind as we go forward and really respect the work that's being done by local Coast Salish communities. And we'll talk about that more later. So in this area, we have had amazingly rapid growth. Seattle is a city that really has blossomed and grown and expanded really over the last 50, 60 years in a really quite amazing way, especially recently. You'll note that for Washington State, we have actually very high population density right in the Puget Sound area. Now, it's worth thinking about why did that occur? Why is there that concentration here in the Puget Sound? Well, it's partially due to the incredibly temperate climate that we have here and the availability of resources that I talked about in terms of the amazing ecosystem of the region. We live in an area that just has this incredibly ecologically diverse and diversity to it. Truly quite beautiful. That's why I moved out here. Let's take a look at what the climate types are for Washington State. Now, New York State, where I'm from, if you look at the climate types there, it's pretty much all blue. It's like essentially one single type of climate. Washington State has an amazingly diverse range of climates within it. We have the very unique, wet oceanic climate that occurs along the Puget Sound, the coastal regions. Then we have the Puget Sound that is a little bit sheltered, less rain, but also still very wet and green. Then we go up into the mountains again, into the Cascades, where we rise up into eventually into the temperate rainforests and into the tundra and then to the snowcap. And then we come off the mountain and mountains, and then we come into dry rolling hills or drier rolling hills, where the watershed coming off of the mountain feeds a lot of the water of the area and the Columbia River. And as we go across the state, you get the essentially a warm Mediterranean climate. That's really quite sunny very often. We even get certain areas of the state that are seen as being a cold desert area. So we have an incredible diversity in the state. Now, a major factor that influences the state is water and the way that water is transmitted. And if you go up along the Sound, seeing these gray, cloudy days is a common event as the atmosphere comes in off of the water. So what's happening here? How does our local climate work? Well, there's essentially two major pressure regions that influence why Washington State has such a unique climatic impacts. So you have the Aleutian low pressure area, which is sort of centered over the Aleutian Islands, and that's to our north. And then we have the Pacific High, which is a high pressure area that is over the Pacific, sort of typically centered around California. Now, what this does, what the Aleutian Low and the Pacific High actually move between winter and summer months, and that's what accounts for the shift in climate for our area. So during the summers, the Pacific High extends all the way up to Washington State, and we get these very little rain. It's actually very often drought conditions, but we have very often have a lot of water, so it doesn't impact us as much. But typically warm, moderate weather, very sunny, etc. But as we move into the fall, the Aleutian Low builds up as a low pressure area. And what this does is it moves the jet stream, which is to the north going across Alaska, down pretty much squarely facing the Puget Sound area, the Pacific Northwest. What this does is it brings a lot of water from the warm Pacific waters, especially from tropical storms, in essentially across in the jet stream, and it hits our coast, and that's where we get all this rain that happens. So this is the cycle that we go through. Winters, the Aleutian Low drops down, brings the jet stream into the Puget Sound along with a ton of water and moisture. During the summers, the Pacific High grows and brings us those warm summers, warm sunny summers. So when you have this water coming in during the fall, winter, and much of the spring, what's essentially happening is the air is bringing this wet, dense, cloudy, moist air that's hitting our mountain ranges, the Olympic Mountains and the Cascades. And what happens is as that air rises up to cross the mountains, the clouds cool. And the cooling of the moisture causes the formation of rain droplets, which causes the rain that we experience throughout much of the year. Now, on the western side of the mountains, that's where particularly large amount of the rain falls. So we see a lot of the rainforest showing up on the western side of the mountains, and also over a bit as well, because of the tremendous amount of rain. Now, once the clouds pass over the mountains, they still do. There still is precipitation, but they drop. The clouds drop down. And that means that there's going to be drier air, partially because a lot of the rain has left, a lot of the moisture has left the clouds already coming up the mountain. And that creates essentially what's called the rain shadow, which is as we extend east across Washington State past the Cascades. So that's really what's going on with respect to our sort of unique local climate. Now, let's just take a look using pictures at Washington State and what our area looks like. So I like doing this just because I think pictures really drive home just how vibrant and diverse and beautiful this area is. We're lucky to have access to these beautiful oceans, amazing opportunities to be out in the water and to see the amazing marine and rich marine life of this area. The orcas that we're so proud of and are so beautiful, seals and other fish and salmon and other creatures of the sea that are very unique to this area, or often found in this area. As we come into the coast, we see the shorelines, which are also vibrant and diverse. We have all these amazing pools. I don't know if you've gone through the pools, the coastal pools, and looked at all the different life that exists there. There's amazing diversity of life, small fish and other types of creatures along the shorelines that are really beautiful and amazing, and a complex ecosystem there. Then we start rising up into the mountains where we start getting the rainforests on the Olympic Peninsula and other parts of the state. Now, this is really a very unique climate that we have, this temperate rainforest. This is a whole rainforest. It gets about, I think on average, 11 and a half feet of rain every year. That's an astonishing amount of water that drops in, and you get these incredibly vibrant forests that are truly a wonder to see. Then as we get over the Olympics, we arrive in Puget Sound, which is in this dip between the Olympics and the Cascades. And, that's both really beautiful, but it also has created this really lush land that has really wonderful growing conditions, very moderate climate, and is also really quite beautiful. Then, as we continue across the state, we go back up into the Cascades, and we get the rainforests there, which are also really quite amazing. As you get higher and higher, you get into the tundra and the subarctic regions, and eventually reach the ice caps and the glaciers at the top of these mountains, which are also unique. I got to say, coming from the East Coast, every time I go over a hill and I see these wondrous white mountains showing up, it's always just such an amazing thing to see. It feels like I'm in the Lord of the Rings or something. So these are also not just beautiful, they're also really important. These reserves of snow are what maintain the water supply for our region. Now, again, as you get across, you have across the Cascades, you have a lot of water coming from these snow caps and off of the rain that came into the mountains, and coming in streams to provide water for a lot of the eastern part of the state. And as you get east, you have these amazing farmlands, as you know, a lot of wine and other types of amazing agriculture in the area that really thrives off of that water that comes out off of the Cascades. And it can be really dry. It's this nice Mediterranean climate. So that's, just some pictures and some ideas around our local ecosystems and climate. I think this is important because as we think about what we value, what's important to us, it's important to have a sense of place. What do we care about where we are? What do we connect to, and how do we value our surroundings? I think that helps center us as we take on some of the challenges of climate change, and also brings in some joy and beauty into that experience. So that's just some thoughts for you. I hope you found it interesting. Take care and be well.